Argos go, 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 go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go. Go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go Toronto, go. Go Argos, go, go.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of the Argo Bounce live audio show with Nick Small and Chris Pomay here on this Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. The Argo Bounce live audio show is live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter/X, and Instagram, and available on all audio platforms and on WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia, the home of Southern Talk and Sports. I hope everyone's doing well on this Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. Happy belated Canada Day for those people. And for those watching tonight from the States, happy 4th of July Independence Day tomorrow down in the United States of America. And I'm looking forward to our show tonight. This is episode 4, and going to bring on my co-host Nick Small, and we're going to talk Argos and a little bit about their 30-20 loss to the Alouettes at BMO Field last week to end their 11-game home winning streak, and preview their game against the 3-0 Saskatchewan Roughriders on the road Thursday night at 9 o'clock on TSN and on the radio TSN 1050 in Toronto with Mike Hogan and Ben Grant. Going to bring on my co-host Nick Small now, and we're going to talk some Toronto Argonauts football. Good evening, Nick. How you doing?
Hey, Chris. Doing good. It's a quick turnaround this week. We got a very short week. As we know, they lost to Montreal on Friday, but they're already in Saskatchewan. They have the Thursday night game tomorrow night. So it's really exciting because this time we get to talk about really immediate pre-game plans. We see the rosters, the depth charts. We can do a little bit of speculating. There's a lot of moves, and even just in the last couple hours, 3-4 hours before we started recording, Hamilton Tiger Cats swiped one of our defensive linemen, Deontay Knight, and the Edmonton Elks signed Sean Oakman, who was cut by the Toronto Argonauts 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly.
I'm not surprised he ended up in Edmonton because of his relationship with Chris Jones, and plus a lot of former Argos are on the Elks. And the Hamilton Tiger Cats also made news today. They fired their special teams coach as well, that they just brought in from Winnipeg.
Yeah, well, you call that squib kick that obviously or arguably cost them the game. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me. So, yeah, we'll see what that makes of it. And I mean, if we like to pretend other teams are the Toronto Argonauts, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, which mediocrity can pay to greatness. And we see that in Hamilton as well, because Benoit Marion, Brandon Barlow, now Deontay Knight, like they've got almost
Peters.
Yeah, Peters, like they've got a full defensive line now of former Toronto Argonauts players. So I guess it says a lot about the scouting abilities of John Murphy and Vince Magri now that everybody who is not with the Argonauts anymore seems to still be in the CFL with another team. So give a big tip of the hat to those gentlemen for recruiting not only great Toronto Argonauts players, but the next generation of CFL stars across the league.
We have a viewer tonight from Buffalo, New York, and he's taking a little bit of an interest in the CFL and the Argonauts. His name is Robbie Schneider. He is the host of the 716 Sports Blizzard podcast in Buffalo, New York. And Robbie's watching right now. And I'm going to be on Robbie's podcast Friday night at 8:15, guys. Please check his YouTube channel out, 716 Sports Blizzard podcast on YouTube. And I'm looking forward to speaking to Robbie on Friday at 8:15. And I want to say thank you to Robbie for watching our show tonight. And hopefully he learns a little bit more about the CFL and the Toronto Argonauts as well. You still there, Nick?
Yep, still here.
Okay. Any thoughts for Robbie on there, Nick?
Go Argos. You're going to love it.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into some questions. Nick, first question I wanted to ask you. You were at the game. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there. But just thoughts on the Argonauts and their 30-20 loss to the Alouettes at BMO Field and their overall effort against Montreal.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a frustrating game to watch, to be honest, because it always seemed we were just that little bit behind the eight ball. It wasn't really until the late stage of the third quarter where it kind of started to break away for us. I recently watched a replay of the game over the last 2 days, trying to make a little bit of sense and breaking it down. And you start to see some of the bigger issues with the Argonauts right now. The secondary is one that kind of comes to mind. There was one area that Montreal was really able to exploit. Offensively, they struggled to convert on red zone opportunities. They struggle with second downs at times, and I think it's a good time to have that experience now, because you're in a situation where, yeah, you were 2-0, you're 2-1 now. You're by no means out of the race. You've got time to reflect on kind of what went wrong. And you can see, and this is one of the best parts about airing today on Wednesday, we're able to see the changes that they've made to the secondary, for instance, for their game plan this week against Saskatchewan. So you're able to learn from these mistakes. Teams are not going to go 16-2 every year. We've seen that it doesn't happen. So we could not have expected this team to have pulled off such a monumentous feat again. So
absolutely. And you know what? You got to give the Montreal Alouettes credit. They're well coached and they're well disciplined, and you have to play your A game to beat the Alouettes. And I don't think the Argonauts did. They had their chances in the first quarter from some of the TV highlights where they were moving the ball, but the red zone offense, Nick, was what, 0 for 3, I believe, in the red zone against Montreal.
yeah, the other thing I found interesting too is you look at the defensive line pressure. They put Fajardo on pressure all game long, and Curtis, give credit to Fajardo. I mean, shades of Ricky Ray as mentor when they were in Toronto together. I maybe wanted to show off to him on his all-time Argo induction night. He had a fantastic game and was able to get the ball quick enough under pressure. Had a bit of luck with some penalties as well that fell against the Argos D-line, a couple of the trip call and a couple of pass interference calls that certainly helped them move the ball continuously. And yeah, just by the late stages of the game, it just became too much out of reach, unfortunately.
You remember Cody as an Argonaut. Did anybody at the stadium see him developing into this kind of a quarterback? Because when he left Saskatchewan, Montreal kind of took a chance on him, and it seems like the last year and a half, he's got it. I guess he's in the right system with the right team and the right coaching staff.
To quote Kimi Räikkönen, yeah, it was me. I always thought Fajardo was the one guy of all the guys, Trevor Harris, Zach Caleros, all the proteges under Ricky Ray. I actually really liked Cody Fajardo a lot, and I really wanted to pull for him to do well. And unfortunately, things didn't really work under in Saskatchewan. But then Moss gets the reins fully in Montreal, and I don't know if it was because of their time in Ottawa, if there were Saskatchewan, if there were things that, because Moss was offensive coordinator the last year under Craig Dickinson. I don't know if there were maybe disagreements between them on philosophies or whatever, but him moving to Montreal, they just managed to click and make everything come together. And you got to give a lot of credit to a lot of the weapons, the wide receivers that are there. Most notably Tyson Philpott, who had a fantastic game and always seemed to find a way to break open against the Argonauts defensive backs.
We've got another viewer on here. His name is Jerry Lemoyne. He goes, "Go Argos." Jerry, thank you for watching along with Robbie Schneider.
Go Argos.
Okay, Nick, you were also at the game, obviously. The secondary we've talked about. Any other concerns from that game that could be a factor in the game against Saskatchewan?
Well, I think the other one that was kind of a challenge. I'm going back into the defensive back thing a little bit, but Quincy Moget going down was another huge loss and exploited a big disadvantage the Argonauts had there in that last game, because now effectively they had nobody at the Sam linebacker spot, the wide side linebacker, and it left a huge gaping hole that they're trying to move guys around to try to fill. And that's one of the big things that they've sort of rectified this week as part of their midweek signings. They re-signed Priester. If you remember 2 years ago, Robert Priester was that Sam linebacker on the team that won the Grey Cup in 2022. He's now back in starting at that spot this week. And then another interesting move they made was that they moved to Sean Blackburn from being the backup or secondary safety spot down, backing up Priester there in that Sam linebacker. And then the other change they made, they moved Johnson out. Leonard Johnson, who was on the boundary side, they moved him out. They moved Benji Franklin over, and then Jonathan Edouard, who had a really fantastic game, probably was one of the best parts of the Argonauts defense against Montreal. They moved him in now to play that field corner spot. So they've done a little shuffling in position, which will hopefully take advantage of some disadvantages. And then the other thing I thought was really good was the offensive line. I thought did a pretty good job last week. I didn't think that a lot of fault was on Dukes being sacked or not necessarily having time to throw the ball. So I thought those things kind of led, if you can draw some positives out of that game, I thought that those were some of the biggest strengths.
One concern was Kadeem Carey. He had 61 yards rushing, but only 9 carries. But I guess when you're not scoring touchdowns and you're falling behind, it takes away from the running game. So I'm hoping this week, Nick, against Saskatchewan, he gets at least 18 carries. Because to me, I think he's very effective if he gets the ball 15 to 20 times a game. I know he had some catches, but I just thought Montreal did a really good job containing the Argos rushing game. I know they had 103 yards rushing, but it really wasn't much of an impact in that game against Montreal.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I found was a challenge too was that on first down they were really able to get good second down field position out of it, and they were in a lot of 2nd and 3, 2nd and 4 kind of situations. But then the challenge was on second down. Montreal was really keen on blitzing. There were not very many situations where they sent less than 2 coverage guys in. So you had 6 linemen going in, defensive players going in on the 5 linemen, and it either left everybody covered or Dukes just simply didn't see them, especially in the red zone where there were guys who open. Or if you're handing it off to Carey on that second down, there's now no hole for him and he got swallowed up. And then conversely, you flip it over. There were a lot of times in this game where Montreal was shut down on first down. They had a 2nd and 10 or a 2nd and long, and they weren't able to convert it. And a good example where they were able to convert on a 2nd and 20 was that the dribble kick play where he tossed it out. And so the ruling is that as long as you're behind the line of scrimmage, when you kick the ball over, it's good. It's just got to be kicked from behind the line of scrimmage. It's got to cross the line of scrimmage. And as long as the person kicking it or anyone behind it is able to recover it, it doesn't matter how far you kick it, whether it's 1 yard or 20 yards or 65 yards. As long as that condition's met, it counts as a first down. And I mean, we can argue over whether or not they should maybe change it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As much as I love the CFL, Nick, I love most of the rules. I love it, but I don't like that rule. I like, in my opinion, Nick, I don't expect you to agree with me. I really don't like that rule. It looks bush league, and they need to address that in the off season. And that's on the record for me.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of split on it. The historian in me says yes, they should change it because it has no relation to football or the kind of original rugby kind of pseudo soccer style football that was played before the modern era. But at the same time, it's on the rest of the team for not covering the guy. I mean, if you want to play a cover four and play deep with leaving absolutely nobody to cover the flats on those plays, then that's on you for leaving a guy that wide open to even enable them to do something like that. I will say one thing though, and when you watch that play in person, it was way faster paced than the way it may have looked on TV. Like the secondary, when they saw what was happening, I forget who it was on the corner, but he came barreling in to try to stop it, and I almost didn't think he was gonna get it off. So there's something to be said about it that and I think one thing too, watching it on replay that really enabled it to work was that the field position for the play, the line of scrimmage was right on, I believe, the 50 or the 40-yard line. It was right on the line. So it gave a really clear, no ambiguity of if it's in the middle, like on like the 47, 46-yard line where you can't really tell if you're onside to make it or not, then it's a little different. But he was able to clearly say, okay, I just have to stand behind this line and kick it. And that's what they were able to do. So yeah, we'll see what happens because they had last year to change it and they chose not to. So we'll see.
Credit to the Alouettes for taking advantage of it. I'm wondering if Saskatchewan might look at that in their game footage against the Argos too. So the Argos are going to have to be aware of that this week against Saskatchewan.
I think every team in the league needs to practice it because it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon.
Well, hopefully by the end of this year it will. We'll leave it at that. Hey, Nick, before we get to the Saskatchewan game, you mentioned one player, but who else stood out for the Argos in their loss to Montreal, in your opinion, from being at the game at BMO?
Yeah, Jonathan Edouard, like I mentioned earlier, was
Yeah.
one guy who stood out. He had the highest PFF rating, I believe, of any player last week, which is pretty wild. Give some credit to Brian Scott. I know he came in garbage time, but he managed to make that really nice pass to Malkai Polk for that touchdown where he kind of rolled into the end zone. I was a little worried that maybe he didn't get in without being touched, but to let it stand, and so that was really nice. So give my credit to those guys, and as well, I'll give another shout out to Liram Haralau as well. Faced a couple of pressure situations early on, and whenever he was out there, he was able to make some clutch kicks to keep the Argos in that game.
All right, let's get to the next question. Thoughts on the Argos team playing their first road game of the season? First three games were at BMO Field, all on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They're playing their first road game on a Thursday night on a short week notice against the 3-0 Saskatchewan Roughriders, led by head coach Corey Mason and AJ Ouellette.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario that they're starting their first road game up against their former defensive coordinator. And as you mentioned, AJ Ouellette, kind of one of the star players of the Argonauts last year, kind of face of the franchise type guy. So looking into it, it's going to be really interesting to see how they play off each other. I would give advantage probably to the defense, given that offensive coaching philosophies don't normally change much year after year, but this year is a little bit different because it is with Cam Dukes in at starting quarterback instead of Chad Kelly last year, who, as we've seen through these first three games, does play with a different play style. If we're kind of jumping a little bit ahead to how you might see this laid out, I think you're going to see Saskatchewan try to probe Dukes into throwing the ball deeper, because so far through three games, we haven't really seen Cam Dukes try that yet. Most of his passes have been short, kind of 10-yard, 15-yard at most. And that was even reflected in the Montreal game. The statistics, I'm not sure if they're 100% accurate on the CFL website, because I know they didn't count the the goal line pass play that Montreal did to score. They ruled it as a 1-yard touchdown pass. So those numbers might be off. But aside from Mackay Polk touchdown catch from Brian Scott, none of the Argonauts wide receivers had 50 yards receiving. So that was a little bit of a concerning thing. And I think if you're looking at it from Saskatchewan's standpoint, that's the kind of thing you want to take advantage of. But I think I'm overall not really that intimidated by Saskatchewan's running game, though, because it hasn't really been there. They don't have the same kind of O-line as Toronto has. I think if we're looking at just a head-to-head comparison, I think I'm still going to take Kadeem Carey, Deontay McMahon, and Dad Adeboboye as the three-headed monster they are over AJ Ouellette, just simply because the O-line is way better.
I'm going to disagree with you on this, Nick. I might be wrong, but I think AJ's going to want to show up his old team, and this Rough Rider team is off to a good start, and they're at home. I think AJ's going to have a good game because anytime former players go against their former teams, I expect AJ Ouellette to be a factor in this game for Saskatchewan. I'm not saying how many yards or how many touchdowns he's going to get, but I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be an impact player for Saskatchewan, especially since I was going to bring this up next question. Since Travis Harris is going to be out, they're going to be leaning on AJ Ouellette and the running game a bit more too to protect the young quarterback out of Michigan in Shea Patterson.
Yeah, we know AJ Ouellette. One thing he's good at is not only as a good running back, but he is a good pass blocker. My case against it, though, is that the Toronto Argonauts have had the best run D so far through the first 4 weeks of the season. So if there's anything to go off of where they may be lacking in the passing defensive game, they're doing a lot better on the running side. But I think if I'm Saskatchewan's offensive coordinator, I'd really be looking at using that fact that they're probably going to try to key on AJ Ouellette early on and use that with Shea Patterson. Maybe you run a couple of you run a lot of play action, fake handoffs, and even you might see that play that Toronto did in the second week where they pulled the guards, everybody chased because the guards were going, and then they faked it to McMahon and he ran the other way, sort of against where the guards had pulled. Maybe Saskatchewan tries something like that offensively to try to kind of fake out and use Ouellette as almost a pick guy that they're going to key on. That'll give Patterson more time. I could definitely see something like that. I think among both teams, what I find really interesting is the receiver matchup. I don't think Saskatchewan has quite as good receivers as Toronto, but on the same side, Toronto's, with the exception of Janarian Grant behind Richie Sindani, they only have one receiver at each position. So we're going really light on the receiver route. So there's just that little part of me that kind of worries just that little bit how they make that work. And maybe part of how Toronto counters that is, as we saw this past week, there were a couple scenarios where they had Kadeem Carey and Deontay McMahon both out at the same time. So maybe they do more of this double running back and go kind of more extra running back and slot back in the field. There's a lot of options to play with, which is making this a really fun kind of mind game to look at based on who's where on the depth chart for this week.
Like I said, Saskatchewan's gotten off to a good start. I think Corey Mace has done a good job so far. I think he's got the players buying into his system, and I don't think this is going to be a competitive game. I have the Argos winning this game, Nick, but I think it's going to be like something like 24-20. And with Shea Patterson, he hasn't played much, so the Argos don't have a lot of CFL game footage on him. I think one of the keys to this game is to try to make him a pocket passer because I don't think he's proven himself or shown enough that he can do it effectively. So if they can contain him from running the ball or whatever and keep him in the pocket, I think the Argos have a good chance of winning this game.
Yeah, kind of thinking about that. I haven't looked at a whole lot of his tape from Michigan, and you might have a little bit better knowledge on that than I do. But from what I could tell, I think if they put the kind of pressure on the defensive line that they did in this past week against Fajardo, I don't think Patterson's going to have the skill the way Fajardo did to be able to break out of those and be
Or
able.
McLeod Bethel Thompson.
Yeah, or McLeod Bethel Thompson to be able to break from those and be able to generate plays off of that. If you do that, you're probably looking at the check down guy, and then you adjust through your linebackers and your secondary to contain that check down guy, because then he's not looking down the field. So I think if you do those things in conjunction with another, it's going to be really hard for him to get the ball off in less than 3 seconds when he's got those 4 big guys swarming around him. If they can do it without a blitz, that's even better.
How does the Argos' health look like going into this game, Nick? Anybody banged up that we need to worry about for tomorrow night?
Yeah, so just looking at it right now, I don't other than other than Quincy Moget now added to the 6-game injured list, that was kind of a big concern on my part, because until they got the added Priester back into the roster, that was my big red flag. And coming home from the game, I was wondering what they do there. Other than that, I think it's pretty much what we've seen already, like Kevin Mittal, Flo Remalade, Dejan Brissett, Dave Ungerer. They're all still on the 6-game injured list. So the wide receiver side of things is pretty much similar. I think it's just kind of hold out, because they've got a pretty big injured list now. There's 10 guys on that list. So 11. So I think you're just kind of trying to wait it out. And not to mention, the other thing everybody's waiting for is Chad Kelly to come back after his 9 games are up. Like, this is part of the plan. I think we kind of discussed early on at the beginning of the season. If you can come out and win in Saskatchewan, and then if you can pull a win in one of Montreal or Hamilton, and if we're being real, it's probably going to be Hamilton over Montreal that they can have better odds at winning. If they come out of that and they're 4-2, that's pretty respectable. And I think going forward, they'd be in pretty good shape. If they lose all 3 of these games and then you're looking at 2-4, then you get a little bit concerned.
Well, and I agree with Pete. One game at a time. They're only looking at Saskatchewan, so I think as fans we should do the same thing. Just look at just getting by Saskatchewan. After Saskatchewan, then I guess they're at Montreal, and then Hamilton on July 20th.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing I like was that I'm starting to think more as I'm attending Argonaut games. I think we just like to boo our quarterbacks when they don't do well, because I know there was a lot of booing towards Cam Dukes
Really?
in the quarterback situation. Yeah. Especially in that third quarter when he threw the INT. Not that it was going to change the outcome of the game at that point. And Brian Scott coming in. But what I do like is that they're not bailing on Brian Scott after a game against the number 1 team in the league, especially when, despite some shortcomings offensively, taking field goals instead of touchdowns, which you would have liked to seen, they're not bailing out on it, that they're abandoning ship. And it's like, oh, is Cam Dukes going to start? Is Nick Arbuckle going to start? No, it's clear that Cam Dukes is still the guy to start. And I really like that commitment to it. It's easy to say when you lose a game, and especially, like I said, to a team like Montreal, that's the favorites right now to win the cup. And I mean, I'm pretty confident he's going to bounce back this game, and along with that, there was a lot of secondary miscomings. I think that was the bigger problem last week than Cam Dukes.
Well, Pete Costanza came on and he said, you know what, even if the game was out of reach at that point, it was valuable playing time for Brian Scott. And it builds his confidence up. And for young players, even if a game's out of reach, it's good for them to get in and get reps and get game experience.
Yeah, and I thought it was good for Brian, and he looked good. I think when you compare play styles, I would argue that Brian Scott's probably the most like Chad Kelly if we're talking about a pure deep ball pocket passer kind of guy. And Scott showed that, where he was able to attack that big gap in the middle in his short stint of time on. And I mean, it's not really a fair comparison and with such a small sample size, but Yeah, to see that is got to give you a little bit of encouragement with the locker room they got going on among the quarterbacks.
I have a feeling, this is my gut feeling, Nick, you're going to see a couple of deep balls tomorrow night from Cam Dukes. I think tomorrow night you're going to see them try to go deep a couple of times in this game.
I hope so. It'd be a nice change of pace, and I think you could see that on the Saskatchewan side as well. I think what you're really trying to do here is probably running a lot of cover ones and really trying to force or encourage the other quarterback to make a desperation throw deep that could lead to turnovers rather than some of these shorter kind of more consistent passing like we've seen before. So we'll see if and you kind of wonder if they're going to run maybe a bit more swing and screen passes because we haven't really seen that to the same extent as they did with Chad in 2023.
I think they're going to open up the playbook a little more. And Nick, my next question: what are some keys to an Argos win in Regina on Thursday night? And who could be an X factor in this game for the Argonauts, offensively and defensively?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think for me, the whole X factor of this game is going to be the defensive line's ability to put pressure on this young Saskatchewan quarterback in Patterson and pressuring him throughout the game. I think if they get to him early and often, I think it's going to slow down the Saskatchewan offense to a crawl, and it's something they're probably going to need because, as we know, kind of the other X factor is the crowd in Saskatchewan. That it is, as much as I like BMO Field, and I know we have the loudest fans in the league of those that show up, Saskatchewan's packed almost every game, and it is. I've been there now, not to watch a game, but I've been to the stadium, and it is an impressively massive stadium, and I can't imagine what that place is like when it's packed. So, that's going to be the other, I think, big factor with it being their first road game. That's what's going to be the big challenge, and I hope the D line steps up and sort of quiets the crowd quickly.
They had a lot of empty seats in a Sunday night game, and a lot of people from the province of Saskatchewan traveled to Regina. So Thursday night on a work night, I don't know if that stadium's going to be full. Obviously, they're still going to have their diehard fans, but I don't think it'll be sold out if it was a Friday night or a Saturday night game in Regina.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. They have better than 11,000 that we're pulling by far. So like even when their attendance isn't tops, it was still pretty solid. And I think you can make a case that was even better than Winnipeg's was the last couple of games in terms of just pure not numbers, but pure visibility on TV. There's a lot of green in those stands still.
By the way, the Argonauts' next home game's not until Saturday, July 27th against Winnipeg. I guess they're having an Afro-American night, and I guess they're giving out 10,000 Argonaut hats as well.
Yep, there's your giveaway, Chris. So we're finally getting our first one of the year. Yeah,
Credit me.
Yep, used to be the Caravan, I think it was called, but
Okay.
they're not allowed to call it that anymore. I think. I don't ask me why. But anyways, so yeah, there's that's usually one of the other big draw weeks. It just kind of stinks that it's a bit of a long way. I unfortunately will not be going to Hamilton for that first or third road game there. I'm at the Toronto Indy that weekend, and that's part of why they're out for that long with all the setup and everything they got to do for that. And it is, I guess, some of these longer, almost month-long road trips are a bit of a taste of what's to come once the World Cup comes to North America. That's going to be it's going to be something. So we're going to have to kind of get used to these long periods of time where if you're going to commit to being an Argos fan, you're going to have to travel a little bit. And I mean, Hamilton, Ottawa, Montreal, they're all fairly reachable and they're worth a trip. I mean, Percival Molson Stadium's this really cool, not quite gothic, but kind of has that sort of stone feel, not like the Sky Dome and being that sort of concrete whatever, but it has a lot more character to it that kind of makes it feel a little bit more classical. And then Ottawa's TD place, I find, is very similar to what we have here at Toronto at BMO Field, and also to an extent what they've got at Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton. They're all great places to see a game. And if you want my advice on where to sit, when I go to road games, I really like to sit up close behind the Argos bench. When I watch games in Toronto, I tend to sit higher up, and hopefully maybe one of these days I'll get a chance to sit up in the press box and see from up there as you have. To look from up there would be cool. But yeah, I'm content. I'm content with being up close and being engaged with the team, because in those road games they want the support from the fans who are most passionate and who care about the team, and it makes a really fun atmosphere too when you do pull the upset road win off.
Hey, one of my X factors for this game is Jerian Grant, who they got from the Blue Bombers.
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a big game against Saskatchewan, and I think he's going to even get a touchdown. So to me, he's my X factor for the game against Saskatchewan tomorrow.
Yeah, I actually, so far this year, I've actually been more impressed with his return ability than Javon Leake, which might be a bit of a controversial thing to say, but especially when he did the cutback 2 games ago there against Edmonton on that one return. That was one moment that really sold me that this guy's got the quick burst of speed. And yeah, we're just one blocking scheme away from making it through. And I'll give a shout out to head coach Mickey Donovan. He was one of the guys at camp who was nice enough to come up to myself and my dad when we came early to the practice. I think it was the double blue game that week that we came out and turned. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for those guys who are willing to come up and say hello. Because while I love to talk about the team and do my analytic thing, I tend to be a little shy talking to the players and the coaches. Like, I don't want to bug them. They've got their job to do. So it's just my thing as a fan to enjoy watching it. So shout out to Mickey Donovan.
By the way, shout out to Rick Bowles. He is an Argo season ticket holder and an Argo fan, and he's watching us on Instagram. So shout out to Rick for watching us tonight on Instagram as well. And so the attendance still 11,000 people, eh? But it'd be nice. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was just gonna say I got cool encounter when a gentleman came up to me and called me out and, hey Nick, you watch the Argos bounce and seen me on this, so it was pretty cool to be recognized like that. I tend to, I'm not used to that kind of exposure, so it's cool to see that people are watching our show and that there are people who care about the Argos and the CFL. So shout out to all of our amazing listeners out there today and throughout the week leading up to this game tomorrow.
I'm gonna put you on the spot, Nick. Who are your Argos 3 stars of the game against Montreal? Might be tough, this one.
Yeah.
Or even if you give me 1 star of the game.
Yeah, like I said, if I had to pick just one, Jonathan Edouard was my guy. He was able to shut down play, and coming in as a backup too, I believe. Came in and was really able to shut down his side of the field, and oftentimes was crossing over to make plays at the other end, providing the support where some other guys in the secondary struggled. So he gets my star shout out today.
And we get another comment, again from Robbie Schneider. Go Argos from Buffalo.
What about you, Chris?
My 3 stars of the game. This is a tough one. Carey, I guess, had 61 yards rushing on 9 carries, and
yeah,
he had 24.
Well.
He had 24 yards receiving. I guess 85 yards. I guess none of the receivers stood out for me, so I'll go with Kadeem Carey as my star of the game. But I'm going to expect a better performance from Jarrett Brankman in the Argos front 4. I think they're going to have a good game on Thursday night, and I think Brankman is another X factor as well. And I just think we'll see. But yeah, for me, the Argos star I guess Kadeem Carey, I thought, had a really good game. I want to see them get Rasheed Bailey going too. I think Rasheed Bailey is capable of having consistent 100-yard games. So I'm hoping they can open up the offensive playbook a little more as well.
Yeah, I think the thing for me going this week in Saskatchewan was that they took a ton of penalties, particularly on the D line, and
11
to be
penalties. Yeah, 11 penalties for 120 yards.
yeah, and to be fair, I mean, when I was watching the replays, like super microscopic, it's like yes, they are the penalties, and I don't disagree with the call, but there was a lot of situations where they were pushed up and kind of flailing, like the trip. I think even um, whoever it was that caused it, I think he actually the lineman did get a hand on his face mask. You could argue, well, why don't you challenge for that? There, but at the end of the day, yeah, it comes to playing more disciplined football and understanding. Yeah, you're gonna get thrust awkwardly, but you can't be so reckless as to take a swipe down on Fajardo or whoever at quarterback and
Discipline, discipline,
grab the face
discipline.
mask. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
discipline.
it's a tough thing. So I think if they can get that under control on the line, then like that could have played the difference had they had have gone 2-and-out with Evans there in the Montreal game, if we're going back on that. And that's the kind of thing they need to be able to do against Patterson this week in Saskatchewan. If they can, like I said, rush him early, rush him often, force a couple 2-and-outs, and they're gonna feel this. Oh, we're going out into this again, and they'll be dealing with that all night long.
Shout out to Marcus Bowman, former CFL player, former Cat, and their head strengthening conditioning coach. He popped on to watch us as well. So
Okay.
yeah, Marcellus Bowman.
One other thing I gotta bring up because we gotta mention it a little bit longer. I think is the inductions. Lou Heyman,
Yes,
Pete Martin, Pavel Bilovich, Ricky Ray. We got to see the all-time Argonauts induction. Maybe not so much on TV, and I was a little disappointed that they didn't show more of it because our beloved Mike Hogan, guest of the show last week, and communications director, historian, our play-by-play commentator on TSN Radio, Mr. Can Do Everything. He was our guest last week and talked a little bit about it. And I thought it was really awesome that they were able to do a proper tribute. They got Lou Heyman's grandson. Pete Martin, unfortunately, wasn't able to be there, but his family was there. Bobby O was there and gave some really, really great words of confidence and inspiration at his, and Ricky Ray, of course, it being his night, added to the all-time Argos banner there. I shared a couple photos of it from afar and up close, and it looks fantastic. Can never have too many great Argo names with a 151-year historic team. So it was a really great thing and a really fun celebration.
By the way, Pete Martin, I did talk to him last year at the 150th celebration, and I told him I grew up listening to Argos football, educated by you and Bob Bertina on CFRB 1010, thanks to the CFL silly blackout rule back then. So I got my education from you and Bob. And Pete Martin's grandson, Jamie Martin, plays for the Buffalo Bandits of the National Lacrosse League.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I know you do a lot of work covering them. So that's really cool that the sport involvement runs through the family. Hopefully gets a chance to check out a couple Toronto Argonauts games sometimes.
I imagine Jamie probably would, since his grandfather Pete. To me, he is Mr. Argo, and he was probably as good as a color analyst they ever had as he was as a linebacker. He was a linebacker from 65 to 72, and then he became their color analyst on radio, I believe, in 77 to 2010. So he started with Dave Hodge and then ended up with Mike Hogan. And yeah, he's one of the best of all time. Obviously, it was Dave Hodge, Bob Bertina, and Mike Hogan. And Pete breeds double blue. When you think of the Toronto Argonauts, Pete Martin is one of those guys you think of.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so great now that they've added this builder category in. There's always been, of course, the emphasis on the players and the legacy. Guys like Kroll and Clemens and others have done, but getting to see sort of the people behind the scenes who have invested so much time into making this franchise what it is, and especially through a lot of difficult circumstances, especially over the last 30 years, let's say, kind of after the end of the McNall, Candy, Gretzky era. There's been a lot of tumultuousness. So to really recognize guys like Pete Martin who have stuck around through the tumultuous times, as well as recognizing guys like Bobby Owen, Lou Heyman, and I'm sure we're going to see other coaches be added to that list as well. There's a couple that come to my mind. So I'm
Don
sure we'll see that.
Matthews. Don
Yeah,
Matthews.
Don Matthews. You can maybe see
Back
Adam
to back.
Rita.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of individuals that can.
Or Ralph Sazio. They brought him to Toronto in '81 to be their general manager from the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and Ralph Sazio turned the Argos franchise around by hiring Bob Obilovich and bringing in those guys. So I would like to see Ralph Sazio possibly get in next year or the year after. And you're right, Nick. The builders thing to me is just as important as the players, because you need the builders to get the players to have success. So I think the Argos get a 2 thumbs up for what they did this year, and I think they need to continue it going forward in the future. And my prediction for all-time Argo next year getting in is Chad Owens. I believe will be the next one in.
Yeah, he's a good candidate. We talked a little bit about it. The individual I'm really glad that over the last kind of, I'd say, year and a half, 2 years, we spent a lot of discussion about is Lou Heyman. Given that with the anniversary, we've had the opportunity, thanks to Bygone Boatman, Dr. James Fraser, that bringing a lot of that really old history back that, because of recency bias, I think a lot of us don't think about. We look at sort of from the 50s and 60s onward, and we don't really look as far into the 1930s and the 1940s, where really the majority of our Grey Cup wins come from. So to be able to see that broader side of things is great. So I think now, as you can see by the comment there, we should probably move a little bit into talking a bit more about this week's game and stop dwelling on the past as much, or we maybe start becoming Montreal Canadiens or Toronto Maple Leafs fans.
Okay, Robbie wants to know. I'm going to let you answer Robbie's question. Do you guys think the Argos win Thursday night, and what will the score be? Nick, you go ahead. Thanks, Robbie.
To not ramble, I think absolutely they're going to be able to win this game, and I think they will win this game. I think there's the potential to break it open, and I'm looking at something kind of similar to how it was last week in the loss to Montreal. I think I could see something similar the other way around, and then go something in the ballpark of 30-20 Toronto over Saskatchewan on the road.
I have the Argos winning 24-20, and I do believe Jerry and Grant will get a special teams touchdown. So 24-20 Argos in a game closer than people think.
Yeah, if I don't think I'll see the special teams thing, but if there's one thing I want to see more than anything, I think I'd like to see more turnovers, whether it's by an interception or fumble. AJ Ouellette doesn't fumble a lot, but I think we haven't seen the kind of turnover generation we've seen last year. So it'd be really nice to see at least 2 interceptions this game. And I think if they force Patterson into making some desperate throws, that there's a lot of potential there. If we're going to look around the rest of the league, and jump into picks for that, I'll go first. Ottawa and Winnipeg. I'm going to go Ottawa again until Winnipeg wins a game. I don't think I'm going to pick Winnipeg, and they've got challenges too, because Zach Collaros might not even play, or play at a limited capacity. So I'm going to pick Ottawa on that game. Calgary, Montreal. Got to go with Montreal for the reverse reason until they give you a reason that they're struggling. Taking Montreal over Calgary, especially at home. And BC and Hamilton, I'm going to take BC.
Okay, I'm going to go with Toronto 24-20 over Saskatchewan. I've got Winnipeg getting their first win of the year, 28-17. I can't see Winnipeg going 0-5, and I don't think Ottawa Ottawa's improved. Don't get me wrong, they've improved, but I just can't see them beating Winnipeg on the road. So 28-17 Bombers. Then Calgary, Montreal. I agree with you, Nick. I think Montreal will win this game kind of easily, 34-18 for the Alouettes. And then BC Hamilton Sunday night. Hamilton plays all their games on Sunday nights, by the way. I think this is their fourth straight game on Sunday night. BC is the favorites, but you know what? I think Hamilton's going to get that monkey off their back and get their first win of the season, 27-24 on a Mark Leggio field goal with no time left. I think Hamilton is going to finally crack that win barrier.
Putting some big faith into the new special teams coach who was hired, 2 days ago?
I do think Hamilton's going to win 27-24. And you know what? If they don't win that game and go to 0-5 and then they have a bye week before the Argos come in town, it will not be very happy in Hamilton. And if they don't win this game against BC, I can see some more coaching changes in Hamilton happening at some point this season as well.
Well, I will say this. When the poll came out on what do you think, who do you think is most likely to make the playoffs of the 3 winless teams, them being Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Hamilton, I'm taking the big boy risk. I'm saying none of them are going to make the playoffs at this rate. So,
yeah, I want to see what happens in the next couple of weeks, but I really do think Edmonton is better than 0-4. I would say right now, Nick, out of all 3 teams that are 0-4 in the league, I would say Edmonton has the best chance of making the playoffs because I think they're better than an 0-4 team. And Hamilton could be 2-2. To be honest, Winnipeg deserves to be 0-4, but I think Hamilton could have easily been 2-2, and I think the Elks could easily be 3-1 in some cases.
yeah, I think the frustrating thing for both Hamilton and Hamilton and Edmonton is that they've looked great offensively for the most part, and it's just some little things, particularly defensively, that's cost them games late, and then like Winnipeg, it's just their offense has completely vanished. So yeah, you still think with a guy like Zach Collaros, there's that potential to bring it back, but they're so banged up. And one of the things too that came out this week was that Lucky Whitehead is signing in Winnipeg. So they, with a couple of injuries now, guys in Winnipeg who are out, bringing Lucky Whitehead in might potentially fill that one of those gaps, depending on how quick he gets up to speed with that system. So we got a lot to look forward to this week. And hey, I had another week of perfect picks, so I hope that continues. I'm not in the undefeated group anymore, but I'm in a pretty good second category on the CFL picks. I think there's only 2 people left who are 16 for 16, and then there's a good skew of us who are 15 for 16. So I hope that streak continues. There's some pretty cool prizes that are being given out as well. Chili Moose is giving out a whole bunch of coolers. There's season tickets. The grand prize is tickets to the Grey Cup. There's party packs with chips, and there's free tickets to games. So if you've been doing them this week and since the beginning, keep doing it because there's a lot of really exciting giveaways the league's putting out. So
speaking of giveaways, prizes, I think we should start looking at doing that for our show to get people to come on and watch our show and listen to it, or even call into our show, guys.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. If anybody out there owns a small business or just wants to help promote our humble little show and talk Argonauts and CFL talk, by all means, reach out to one of us. You've probably seen our information on the bottom line there, and we always talk about it at the end of the night. So by all means, reach out to one of us, and we'll throw in a plug, and we'll happily promote your business.
Anyways, Nick, I think we're going to wrap up this show, but hey, we just finished episode 4. Unfortunately, like I said, Pete, I was unable to come on tonight at 8 o'clock, so I had him on my other show. That episode with Pete Costanza is available on all major platforms, YouTube, Apple, iHeartRadio, etc. And episode 5 we'll do next week. Hopefully it will be an Argos win over Saskatchewan, and hopefully we can get a guest on next week as well, Nick. But I want to say thank you so much for coming on and talking Argonaut football as well. And we have a newer, different version of our show compared to the other podcasts. I'm the older generation Argo fan, and you're the younger, so it's kind of the old and young Argo show here.
Yep, and shout out to everybody who's engaged with us tonight. I think what's been really exciting to see this week in particular was that we've gotten a lot more of that fan engagement among other people across the league. So if we can continue that and being able to have some of these live impromptu discussions, make it a lot of fun, and that's what kind of sets this apart from a recorded podcast where we kind of set the agenda. We're a little bit looser with that, and it provides a lot of great discussion about events going on, and that opportunity to mention things that happen just hours before we go live. So thanks to everybody for tuning in real time, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in throughout the day and into the rest of this week.
Argos, Saskatchewan, tomorrow night, Thursday, July 4th, 9 p.m. kickoff, TSN, and I believe on TSN 1050 with Mike Hogan and Ben Grant from Mosaic Stadium. I still want to call it Taylor Field in the old stadium.
Yeah, well, once you go there in person, Chris, it is not Taylor Field, Old Mosaic Stadium. You will be blown away. Like I gotta say, that was one of the best experiences I had. Regina was a wild time, and I know the Argos faithful who managed to, unlike me, get out of work and head over. They are loving it over there.
And finally, Robbie Schneider, the host of his own podcast show, 716 Sports Blizzard Podcast in Buffalo. Robbie, I think my co-host Nick Small would make a great guest because Nick knows the Toronto Argonauts, the CFL, as good as anybody. So, Robbie, reach out to my co-host Nick Small, and I'm sure he'd be glad to come on your podcast in the future. And again, everybody, Robbie Schneider's from Buffalo. Check out his podcast, 716 Sports Blizzard Podcast from Buffalo. He's going to have me on as guest this Friday night at 8:15 p.m. And he also has his own YouTube channel, 716 Sports Blizzard Podcast. So thank you so much, Robbie, for enjoying our show and coming on and being a fan. And I'm excited to be your guest on your podcast show as Friday. And maybe one day Nick will be on your show as well.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. If you ever want a CFL guest, even if it's just for a impromptu history lesson on the CFL and all of our amazingly different rules compared to what you guys got down south in the NFL, more than happy to talk about it.
And thank you everyone watching this live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter /X, and on Instagram, and also on all major audio platforms. And everyone can listen to the weekly Argo Bounce live audio show on WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia, the home of Southern Talk and Sports. Their station manager, Ryan O'Neill, loves the Canadian Football League. And check out the Rod Peterson Show, 12 to 2, Monday to Friday on WQEE 99.1 FM. And Rod's a huge CFL backer and fan and former longtime play-by-play announcer for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Nick, that's about it. I want to say thank you so much for coming on for episode 4 here on this Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. And enjoy the game tomorrow night against Saskatchewan. And as always, go Argos.
Thank you, Chris. You too. Go Argos.
Have a good night, everybody, and thanks again for watching and listening to the Argo Bounce live audio show, a weekly show devoted to the CFL's 18-time Grey Cup champion, Toronto Argonauts. We'll see you back here next week. Date and time to be determined with a guest for episode 5. Have a great evening, everybody, and as always, go Argos.
Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go. Go Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together.